Hi, Elisabeth. Welcome to the Genetic Genius podcast. I'm so thrilled to have you as a guest today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yay, you're welcome. Before we dive deep into the brain, let's first hear a little bit about you, your background, what you love to do, what makes you, what gets you up in the morning, your passion, your purpose.
Yeah, I would say my passion and my purpose is really helping people heal in order to expand their life, specifically at the level of their nervous system and their body and then using that healing at the level of the nervous system, the operating system, to create change in their behavior and the way they show up in the world and their ability to connect and be present and to just live an expanded life coming from a system that is more regulated. And I got into this line of work. I've been a mover my whole life. I think without even knowing it, I always use movement as a tool to regulate myself. And I have childhood trauma in my background. I have had a kind of unstable upbringing. And I really think movement kept me sane and safe and functional for a lot of my life, even though I didn't understand that at the time. And so I've been a movement practitioner my whole life. I had a couple Pilates studios here in Austin, and we were developing a teacher training program and an online platform. And I knew I wanted brain science to have a place in that. I knew enough to understand that, like, you don't have a tight hip flexor, you have a brain that is sending a signal, keeping a certain amount of tension in the muscle. And until you really do something to address that neural loop, that feed, then your brain will continue to try to protect you by keeping that tension there. So you can foam roll all you want, but you have to change it at the level of the system. And so I started studying applied neurology with an institute in Arizona called Z Health in 2015, and really used applied neurology for a long time for athletic performance and for pain management. And then I hit a patch in my own life where everything fell apart and I was under a tremendous amount of stress. I had to dissolve my partnership shares in the business that I'd had for 12 years. The very same week I dissolved my partnership shares, my romantic partner at the time was diagnosed with a really rare cancer around his heart. And I went into being a full-time caretaker for him. It was a really stressful situation where I never really felt safe. And that brought up a lot of my unresolved childhood trauma. So I had all these things coming at me at once, and I started to experience really severe outputs of my own nervous system. My binge eating got really bad. I had migraines, chronic pain. And I knew enough at the time to look at the world through the lens of applied neurology, to look at people and see their nervous system functioning in their posture, in the way that their eyes moved, and the tension that they carried. And I saw it in myself. I started seeing the signals that I looked for in my clients of dysregulation before I experienced these outputs. And that sent me into a long path of healing myself through somatics, body-based work, applied neurology, nervous system training, and many different modalities of healing to resolve all of those old patterns, the old trauma in my body. And then when the pandemic hit, I knew a lot of people were going to be facing that same situation, a lot of financial fear, big changes in the world, fears about health concerns. And so I launched my platform in March of 2020 to give people some really practical tools to work with their nervous system and to regulate in this time of stress.
I love that, Elisabeth. One, your story is so powerful. And also, when we have our own story, it really feeds us for that, like that purpose of helping others. And then also, what a great time to help people with stress right now. We're still in the pandemic. People are still having a lot of residual stress, which we'll talk about that with the neuro pathways and how you help clients in that way, which I can't wait to dive into. And it's so powerful. Our brain has such a huge aspect of a way, can help us and hinder us at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So let's first talk about stress, because you mentioned that. And I think, there's so many people that are dealing with stress right now in ways that they don't understand, right? Of ways that they do understand. But I think stress is a mixed bag. people just think I don't know, the word is almost thrown around so much.
Yeah, yeah, it
It's
really
like
is. And
common.
from my perspective, and the way that I deal with all of it is that stress is a very physiological thing that happens in the body. And we're, as humans, we're meant to handle stress. We need a little bit of stress for adaptation to occur, but the problem comes when you have chronic stress, too much stress for too long.
Mm-hmm.
And we can get stuck in that states of chronic stress because of our environment, because of everything that we're going through collectively and individually, but also because of old trauma that has not been healed. So again, like trauma is not something, it's not the event itself, but it's what occurs in the body, and it doesn't really understand time and space. It just
Mm-hmm.
gets re-triggered and your body experiences the same thing physiologically. So that can add to stress. Deficits in our nervous system can add to stress that we have accumulated over time, just as part of being alive, right? Our
Mm-hmm.
visual system starts to deteriorate, or we don't have a very clear map of our body in space because of old injuries that we never rehabbed. And so all of that starts to add stress to the system.
Mm-hmm.
And too much stress for too long is dangerous. It starts to create a disease state in the body because you have all
Mm-hmm.
these stress hormones pumping out, adrenaline and especially cortisol. And over time, that starts to damage the blood vessels, damage the nerves, dysregulate the immune system, cause
Mm-hmm.
inflammation. And our bodies and our old brains understand at a deep level that needs to stop, that we need to be brought out of that state. And your old brain's primary job is your survival. Is always making the decision, safe or unsafe. And so if we're in that dysregulated state for too long, it will start to drive our behavior into things that regulate us, like maybe eating a bunch of food to move
Mm-hmm.
out of that sympathetic nervous system state and bring you back into rest and digest, calm and respond, knock you out. Maybe drinking alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
maybe overtraining because it feels like we always have to be moving. So we have these behaviors that are really our brain's best way of getting us the regulation we need when we've been under too much stress for too long. If we want to change those behaviors, then we need new tools for regulation so that we can bring ourselves out of these heightened states of arousal and do it in a way that serves us and that isn't damaging long term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, so true. And so you mentioned a couple things about symptoms somebody might be experiencing if their nervous system is, like you said, in a state of arousal or in that state of stress. Can you name off what it would be if someone's listening right now? What would be they're tuning like, oh yeah, these things are happening to me. Maybe I'm in this state of chronic stress and I don't realize it.
Yeah, I think really there's always outputs coming out from our nervous system, and they can generally be divided between protective and performance. So when your
Mm-hmm.
brain and your nervous system feel safe, you can be connected, you can be present, you have good range of motion through your muscles, you have more strength in your muscles, you breathe better, you feel better, you have more
Mm-hmm.
energy. When your brain feels threatened by chronic stress or by deficits that are causing it to feel like it doesn't really understand what's going on in the world around you, it can't make good predictions, it starts to generate protective outputs. And that can be anything that
Mm-hmm.
gets you to reduce the amount of stimulus coming in, to make your world smaller and to keep you safe. So pain
Mm-hmm.
is one really good example. If I'm in pain, I take smaller steps. I don't work out with as much intensity. I engage with the world less. Maybe I go lay down and in a dark room and pull the covers over my head, and my
Right.
old brain is, we're safe now.
Yeah.
So it
Right.
can be pain. It could be dizziness, nausea,
Mm-hmm.
fatigue. It could be a migraine or a visual disturbance. It could be binge eating, drinking. Tools. These are tools of self-regulation. And it can be depression and anxiety.
Right.
Your brain is going to find the way that is most effective for you to keep you safe, the outputs that you will respond best to, so that it can accomplish the job of getting you to reduce the stimulus and the intensity of living.
That totally makes sense. And you mentioned the behavior and like the pattern piece. If in relationship to trauma, if somebody is experiencing or has experienced in the past a specific behavior, and when they're in a state of stress, is that behavior going to be coming up more often in this repeated pattern since they've established that kind of like neural pathway previously?
Yeah, we all have our own unique neuromatrix, which is what happens. It's how the system forms in response to our life experiences. And most of the time, as really young children, as infants between the age of 0 to 7, we form a lot of those pathways and connections. And as an infant, as an entirely helpless being, we are dependent upon our caregivers 100% for our
Mm-hmm.
survival. And so we will make decisions, adaptations about our behavior in order to ensure that we stay safe and we get our needs met. And sometimes those are really codependent patterns. Sometimes those are patterns of suppressing our emotions, not
Mm-hmm.
expressing our full desires. It can be patterns that are harmful to us later in life. But at this deep level,
Mm-hmm.
our old brain, our nervous system, and our body feel like that's safe. That's the
Right.
safe way to stay alive and to stay safe. And so we replay those. And then when things happen in the world, in our future relationships, we carry those attachment styles and those ways of responding to stress into our life onward into adulthood if we don't do something to re-educate our system, to
Mm-hmm.
retrain the system. And so we get triggered by our partner, our romantic partner, or by
Mm-hmm.
our work relationships, and then we experience those same protective outputs and those same patterned responses, maybe of codependence, over giving, of shutting down, that we did as children, because we haven't taken the time to change that.
Yeah. So it's sometimes it can be a pattern that we recognize from childhood, and sometimes it's something we don't recognize. Right? Oh
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you mentioned eating, having that pattern. Maybe you're like, oh, for me, I love sweets, and if I get stressed out, that's I always go to like, oh, I think I'll have some cookies or something like that, and I recognize that pattern within myself. But at the same time, it's challenging to like to reprogram that message within myself because I feel safe. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna have a cookie. It's like sass. It's like my reward system.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was a time that I really realized how much my binge eating had been keeping me safe and healthy and really functional in the
Mm,
world. Because as someone who had a lot of instability in their childhood, I was absolutely stuck in dysregulation
mm,
as a little kiddo. And my body intuitively learned, if I eat a bunch of food, I will calm down.
mm,
And as I grew up, the same thing, like I would push past the quieter signals of my body, maybe a little bit of pain, maybe tension in my jaw, fatigue, because I
mm.
trained as an athlete and I've always been hard driving type A. And so I pushed through all of that with my workaholism, with my training. But a really great way to get me to slow down, rest, and to move out of that heightened arousal state was, again, to eat a bunch of food. And I've
Right.
known other people in my life who experienced the same amount of trauma, having a high ACE score, which stands for adverse childhood experience, and is really linked to
Mm-hmm.
disease development and addiction later in life. And those people did not have food as a tool for self-regulation, and they got sick. Some of them were institutionalized, some of them got
Mm,
cancer, some of them developed really severe autoimmune. And
mm-hmm.
I really deeply believe that my body's intuitive ability to do that protected me from some of the damages of that trauma that I
Mm-hmm.
would have incurred had I not had that tool of self-regulation.
Yeah. So you're grateful for that, right? It's
Mm.
yeah, to have some tools that you developed early on. And so when a part of what you do is helping to train or retrain the nervous system. And so how when you're looking at the brain and retraining it, how does that work with stress? How does it reduce stress? And by retraining the nervous system, retraining or reprogramming that DNA in the brain.
Yeah, so there's a couple areas that I focus on. And one is just learning really practical, simple tools for self-regulation so that I can start to, one, become an expert of my own nervous system. I can start to hear the signals that it's sending me when they are quieter, when they're softer, right? Because our body is always speaking to us. And if we don't pay attention to it, it will have to get louder and louder until
Right.
we hear this really severe outputs, right? So it's like screaming at us, like shutting you down. And so I've had to train myself, and I work with my clients a lot too, to start to recognize what signals their nervous system is giving them early on to say, hey, we're moving into a state of dysregulation. Maybe it's a little bit of pain in the left knee. Maybe it's tension in the jaw. Maybe your mouth starts to dry up and you start to lose saliva in your mouth because that saliva is part of your rest and digest process. Tension around the eyes. And then I teach people really practical, easy tools to self-regulate when you are feeling those symptoms. So that could be as simple as taking a long, slow exhale and making your exhalation twice as long as your inhalation, or maybe doing some circles with your tongue. Our vagus nerve is a really important cranial nerve that helps our body move into that calm and respond state, and it helps keep us regulated. And it also innervates the back of the tongue. So if you move your tongue, you can just keep your mouth closed, keep your lips closed, and run your tongue over your teeth and make a big circle and try to go a little bit further back each time, maybe 3 or 4 circles in each direction. And then stop, take a breath in, take a nice long exhale, and notice if you feel calmer, if you feel less of those symptoms. And so just these really small, practical ways to re-regulate in the moment, so that as I'm starting to experience those little soft signals, I can say, hey, my nervous system is telling me I'm moving into a dysregulated state. I'm going to give it a couple drills that it responds really well to, so that I don't end up moving into the binge, so that I don't end up drinking a bunch of alcohol, so that I don't end up experiencing chronic pain. And I keep interrupting that loop so that it becomes easier and easier to interrupt that loop and to choose a new behavior. So that's one of the ways that applied neurology can really help with regulation. And the other is that our nervous systems are like a bucket in this instance, and all of our life stress goes into that bucket. So we have the stress of a pandemic, we have the stress of work, of our relationships, of change. Any kind of change is inherently threatening to the brain. Of our New Year's resolutions, we're trying to bake in new habits, but that causes stress.
Right.
And so that water level in the bucket is just rising. But very physiologically, deficits in our nervous system will also start to increase the water level in the bucket. So maybe you have a vision issue in your right eye and you can't move it to the left without experiencing threat. Or maybe your brain's map of where your left foot in space is blurry because you have an old ankle injury that you never rehabbed. And so those mechanoreceptors inside of the joint don't have a good connection to your brain. And so a lot of what we do on my membership site is we intentionally train those different input systems: your eyes, the balance system in your inner ear, your body mapping system, your sensory system, with just everyday daily training of the nervous system to resolve your unique deficits, so that your brain is getting better information from the input systems. And when your brain is getting better information from the input systems, it has a clearer picture of where you are in space and of the world around you. And then it can do its primary job of making predictions to keep you alive more easily. And so the water level in the bucket at that very physiological level starts to go down because you breathe better, you see better, you balance better. And so now you have more space in the bucket to experience the stress of, I don't know, starting a business, growing a business, doing habit change, living up to your resolutions. You can handle the stress of that without experiencing those protective outputs that happen when the water level goes all the way to the top of the bucket.
I love the bucket model. I talk about that with my patients too, because it's really relatable, right? It's like, we have so many things that go into the bucket on a daily basis, or like you said, from that chronic stress piece. And I also like what you're talking about with almost like a volume knob, right? So you have this, we're our radio receiver, and we're turning up the volume with different levels. Like, okay, what's our input for that station over there? And our brain is responding to those different levels of input. And we decide
Yes.
what level that volume is going to be. We're like, okay, I'm going to go to the rock concert tonight, and I'm going to turn up the volume as high as I can so I can experience the music. But then maybe that's stressful for me because it's a pandemic and I don't want to be. So there's all kinds of things our body responds to, like you said, and being in that. Also, I loved how you talked about the vagus nerve, because that is so key, because we have, it's coming from our brain all the way through our gut, through our cardiovascular system, giving us different inputs about, and the way that it communicates, right? The vagus nerve has so many different aspects of how it not controls, but how it works within the body. So key. And when you're talking
Yeah.
about retraining that, and so you talked about a couple different techniques, how long did those techniques last? So you talked about doing some of those drills that you mentioned, and then as we're retraining, it creates bigger space. So how long, let's say you were practicing one of the techniques, would you be able to, I guess what I'm asking is it like an onion effect? So you're going to be like building up, and then you'll be able to have a longer effect. So in the beginning, you might have to do it more frequently.
Yeah, it really depends person to person,
Mm-hmm.
because everybody's nervous system is so unique and different. But
Right.
every once in a while, I get that one client where we do a drill and it's just the exact stimulus that their brain and their nervous system was waiting for. And
Mm-hmm.
it just turns on a certain pathway, a certain area of the brain, and then they're like good to go. The pain stops and their
Ding.
brain is happy. But that's very rare. The way that I see it work for most people is you are just constantly training those systems with just little bits of training. So 5 to 10 minutes a day, you're
Mm-hmm.
working on training your nervous system, training your vision, training your balance system, training your body mapping system, just like you would train your muscles in the gym to
Mm-hmm.
be stronger, more resilient, or just putting in a little bit of time to
Right.
train your nervous system. And then those drills change over time. So every week we have different drills because the brain needs novel stimulus. You're
Right.
continuing to find drills that your brain responds well to and giving it a little bit of time. And then also in the times of acute stress, in the moment of stress, actually using those drills to re-regulate so
Mm-hmm.
that you're changing your reaction again and again over time. And then I do think the baseline level of stress eventually goes down. Like I
Mm-hmm.
think I operate moving through the world at a lower stress state now because of all the training that I've done.
Yeah.
And I still have to keep doing it. I don't think it'll
Right.
ever like reach this place where I'm like, okay, good, my body's set.
Because we're adapting to the world around us all the time. The world's changing, we're changing. And I really think it's true what you said too, is that when we work on meditation is a great example. It's like if you're working on having that mindset where you're moving into creating the space where you're tuning out the world around you and tuning in, you're changing that response. And so over time, we have a different response level or different response stimulus, depending on what's coming into our environment. And that's what I think you said too about that trauma piece. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit as well. And when we're in that state, well, let's talk about the trauma now. So when we're in, say you've had, let's just pick something. Let's say, I'll let you pick something, a trauma example. And that, how does that trauma then impact the nervous system function from the neural pathway through the brain, whether that's a physical trauma, an emotional trauma, or a spiritual trauma, because we all have those different levels of trauma, right? So I'd love for you to talk like about what that trauma looks like. I know it's individualized, but how it can show up in the nervous system.
So one of the clearest examples for me is coming from an environment as a child where things are pretty unstable and caregivers are dysregulated.
Mm-hmm.
Having that feeling of always having to change and control your environment to stay safe, which
Mm-hmm.
then leads to a lot of hypervigilance in your daily life moving forward. So just this constant over reading of people. So
Yeah.
really paying attention to everybody's facial expressions and their tiny micro expressions. And is this person in the corner of the room over here? How are they doing? How's their experience? What's happening in the tone of their voice? And so it's this constant drive to bring in almost too much information to try to control your environment and stay safe. And it's very exhausting. And so
Right.
our nervous system stays at this level of hyper awareness, too much arousal, too much awareness, bringing in too much stimulus and information, but it doesn't feel safe to stop doing that because of our past experience. And then we find that social situations where there's a lot of people that you have to be aware of and a lot of input coming in might be very exhausting. And you might
Right.
experience then outputs of your nervous system trying to get you to not do that because, man, this is too energy costly. This is too hard. For me, whenever I would go to a social situation, I ended up binging when I would come home to bring myself down out of that state of hyper arousal.
Yeah.
But it could also be like you get a really bad headache, so you don't go. You've experienced a lot of pain, so you don't go. So our body is trying to protect us from something that it knows is going to really deplete us from a lot of our energy because we're too aware of and taking in too much stimulus that's just an overload for the system.
Right. Like a computer. Brain is a big computer. Yeah, it's overloading our system. And what if you're not able to remember that trauma or correlate that trauma with a current situation? Does that make sense? A lot of people, and my patients particularly, will have something they don't recognize as a trauma, or they're not able to connect with that trauma. It's so painful. So is there a way to like reprogram and retrain the brain for that connection piece? Someone had a sexual circumstance that was so painful that every time that they think about it, they can't even go into that place. But then they know or they recognize that the patterns of their arousal with the stress levels are so high anytime they're in that kind of like same sexual experience. This is an example. So how do you work on recognizing the trauma if it was something that you said to yourself, well, I can't even go there because the trauma is so traumatic, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. I also have sexual abuse as part of my own background. And so dissociation is a huge part of that.
Yeah.
Checking out of the body, leaving, not being able to read the signals from the body. And then as you try to come back into it, it can be really triggering, even just to come back into your own body. And I am a huge believer in that we do not have to keep re-traumatizing ourselves to heal.
Right.
I don't think it's always the right thing to dive back into the trauma and to talk about it over and over again.
Right. Relive it over and over again.
Yeah. It's just making that response even more well-worn, right? If I keep pushing myself into dissociation, if I keep pushing myself into panic, then that neural loop is getting more ingrained. And then that reaction comes faster when I'm in that situation and in my regular life, when I'm with a partner, when I'm in a stressful situation at work, then I move more quickly into that trauma response that I don't want to keep replaying. And so what I do for myself and what I do with a lot of my clients is just looking at it from a follow the symptoms back kind of way, and just trying to create a new physiological response in the body when they are experiencing the symptoms. So when I want to binge, instead of binging, doing some vagus nerve drills, doing some respiration drills, and creating the felt sense of safety in my body. So before and after I do something that is stressful for me, like visibility is hard for me. It's something that growing up in an unstable childhood, I have this deep belief that people are unstable and inherently dangerous. And so if I can stay in the background, then I'm safer. And that led for a lot of my life to hiding out in relationships and institutions where I was not the visible person. Now here I am, I own my own business. I'm doing this podcast. I'm putting myself out there.
You're like,
and my nervous system was not okay with it at first. I would do a podcast and then I would really want to binge. I would get a migraine. And so what I do is in those triggering situations, I do drills. I do things that my nervous system likes before I do the thing
Right.
and after I do the thing to
Yeah.
re-regulate. After this, I'll probably do some high payoff drills. I'll go for a walk. I'll maybe wear some colored glasses that my nervous system responds well to, maybe jump on
Hmm.
my trampoline,
Right.
process some of the stress through. So instead of like cognitively trying to go back and deconstruct the event, I'm just before and after I experience the things that trigger that felt sense of panic or feeling unsafe inside of my own body, I
Hmm.
use tools to regulate myself, bookend it with things that help me to regulate so that I keep creating a new experience inside of my body around the thing. And then maybe eventually I do end up going back and using some somatic movement or some EFT tapping or something like that to discharge some of the emotion that comes
Hmm.
from the event as I talk
Yeah.
about it, as I think about it. But in the beginning, it's really just about creating safety in my body again and giving myself the tools, the agency, the ability to do the things that I want to do, have an intimate relationship, grow a business, be present, go to social events, and not suffer the really severe consequences of a trauma response or a protective output, because
Hmm.
I have these very practical tools that I can use to give my body and my nervous system what it needs to be okay with that.
That's great, Elizabeth. So key for really, I loved what you said about not reliving the trauma, that first part that you said, because I think that there's this old belief system that the only way that you can get better, or I don't really even like that term, to live your new life is to relive the old trauma. And I'm like, that really hasn't worked very well for us in the past. I think we can live in the new moment and retrain our DNA, retrain our brain for a new thing, focus on the new. And like you said, having those tools when we feel unsafe or when we feel anxiety or when we feel nervousness, that we let our body feel. And I think that is really important with what you said. Process it through your body. Don't just put it on a in a little bottle and on the shelf and like, yeah, I'll deal with that later. When,
Totally.
because that doesn't really help us. But so I love how you're connecting the movement piece in with the brain piece, in with the acknowledgement. So there's that piece of acknowledgement, but also not like the reliving of the terror or the trauma over and over again, which doesn't really serve us. We got to live in the
No,
present.
no, it doesn't. And especially if we keep reliving it without a way to discharge the emotion that's coming
Right.
out. So we relive it, we talk about it, and then we just sit there
Yeah.
and
Right.
and then rebottle up all of that energy of those
Hmm.
emotions. And so when I do revisit it and process it through, I am very intentional about then making sure I do things to move it through. And it doesn't have to be neurodrills. Neurodrills are a great tool, but there's so many tools, right? You
Hmm.
could dance, you could
Right.
jump, you could shake, you could,
Mhm.
if you feel a lot of anger coming up, you can punch a pillow and scream into it. You can
Right.
go for a walk out in nature.
Yeah.
There's so many tools available, and it's just important to let it move through.
Hmm. Yeah, so true. And I feel like for some reason people have lost those tools. I don't know if it's more because we're more stationary or not, and we're not getting out as much. But really, the pandemic, I think, had a lot to do with that. But we've lost those kind of like rituals, those basic instinctual grounding tools that we learned as humans on the planet. We lived in nature. We would
Amen.
have like fire ceremonies. We would talk about things around the fire and have a way that we could release them instead of it just being boxed up into a place where we're not able to release. And I liked what you said too about getting it out into nature. We call that nature walking in naturopathic medicine, or nature cure, where you're walking barefoot in the grass or laying naked in the sun, like breathing, letting your body air breathe.
Yes, I Amen. I agree with all of that so much. And I really think sometimes we've like civilized ourselves out of our animal body's natural intelligence of how
Mm,
to heal from the trauma. And so we are now experiencing a lot of disease and dysregulation because of it.
mhm, mhm,
And that there is a knowing, an instinctual knowing that we have of to shake, to move things through, to cry, to scream, to flail around, to dance, to be out in nature, like you said, to reground. And we just have moved away from it collectively. And we
mhm.
have these beliefs that emotions are scary or bad, or that
Right.
it's not acceptable to express your anger, or it's weak to express your grief, or that it will stress people out or scare people if you have
Right.
big emotions. And so we suppress so much of that. And it's not conducive to good health or
Right.
regulated nervous system.
Yeah, definitely. It puts us into that fight or flight mode if we're okay, I can't really tell you how I feel in this moment. So I'm just going to pretend that everything is okay. And as
Yeah,
women, we really do
exactly.
that a lot, which is so not good for us. Expressing we're the self caregivers, taker overs, taking care of everyone around us instead of taking care of ourselves, for sure. When you, term that you talk about is trauma resolution, and is that what you're, is that the what we've been talking about? Is this kind of, what does that mean exactly for our listeners, that like resolving the trauma or coming to terms with the trauma? What does that mean exactly?
Yes, a great question. So it is for me and for brain-based wellness, what we do is first create safety in the body. We make it
Mm-hmm.
safe to come back into your body, just to drop from your head down into your body, to begin to read the signals. And we do that by practicing that, dropping from the head into the body, hearing the signals, but then again, couching that before you do it and after you do it with some stimulus, with some drills that your brain and your nervous system like, so that you start to feel safe coming into your own body, reading the
Mm-hmm.
signals. And so safety first is the first part of that
Right.
process. And then, yeah, resolving the trauma is creating a new felt sense, a new experience inside of your body
Mm-hmm.
when exposed to those same things that trigger you before, so that you don't
Mm-hmm.
have to keep reliving that response, that patterning over and over again. So sometimes I will even, in some of my small group trainings, like I have a food freedom group for disordered eating, and sometimes we intentionally trigger ourselves. We're going to
Mm-hmm.
binge and we push that away and allow what is coming up to come up, and then
Right.
learn tools to process the emotions through that, and then to re-regulate ourselves as we do it, whether that's through somatic movement or EFT tapping or neurodrills, but something that allows you to express the emotion, to
Mm-hmm.
discharge it, and then to re-regulate yourself after, so that you're teaching yourself it is safe to express emotion, it is safe to let this go and to engage in a different behavior. And then doing that over and over again, you can change your system, your
Mm-hmm.
operating system, so that you don't have the same response to the old trigger.
Right. Yeah. Creating a new response, breaking that tape loop in your brain so that you're
Yeah,
having a new song to play when you have the trauma come up.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What do you think about, you mentioned a group, like working with groups. What do you think about the kind of the, I would say we're moving into this newer age of healing where we're doing a lot more group work, where it was so individualized. I guess maybe like 80s and 90s were really individualized. And now I would love you to talk about your opinion of this like collective healing. Like, you know, we're moving into working with groups of people that have some maybe trauma or like-minded issues, and how does that affect us from that stress level and that neural pathway recreation when we're working with others in that collective healing environment?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of collective healing. I feel like one of the hardest emotions to deal with when it comes to trauma and when it comes to disordered eating, and a lot of the people that I work with, is shame.
Mm-hmm.
And that is lifted quite frequently by just sharing the experience with other people. We need other people, and we need people for co-regulation. We
Mm-hmm.
need practice, being able to practice new types of relationship bonds, new types of attachment, having a safe space where we can practice moving out of our codependent patterns, practice telling the truth, whether we think people will like it or not, practice not being a people pleaser, and then regulating ourselves around that, and then just holding a space together. And I feel like in a lot of my groups, it's the work is powerful, but a lot of the healing just comes from the collective wisdom and the shared experience of it. And
Mhm.
so to me, that's what I do also work with private clients, but I typically, if someone, unless it's a situation where they really don't feel comfortable in a
Mhm.
group setting, I encourage people to go the group route, because I just see it, that it's a much richer experience. And for myself too, like I've done so much healing work, and so much of it has been like alone in my room in the dark.
Right.
And I was like, I don't want to do it like this anymore. I want to be out in the world. I want to play. I want to connect with people. I
Mhm.
don't want to have to heal alone anymore. I want to share an experience with people.
Yeah, so powerful when we have that, like you said, that sharing experience. And we're all connected through some level, right? Through our DNA. We do share something with another being. And when we can connect in that collective way, it triggers in a good way. It's triggering that healing response through the genetics, through the cellular memory, something we might not
Yes.
even ever have known about. What's it called? The butterfly effect, like the 6 degree of separation. So I love that about
Yes.
the sharing collective, is because you might be with a group with, I don't know, 30 people, and then you might be connected to 6 of those people you didn't even know about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, like you were talking about too, it's in our DNA to want to sit around the fireplace together and share our stories and
Mm-hmm.
be able to share our experience. And that just in and of itself is healing. And
Mm-hmm.
having our story, I think that, and having people to witness that, to witness our story, to witness our experience and our growth. And yeah, absolutely. I think
Mm-hmm.
collective healing is powerful and really needed.
Yeah, the wave of the future. I've totally. Can you talk about, so switching gears for a moment, how you combine the movement? Because you've mentioned a little bit, and I know movement is a big part of your practice and how you help clients, how you work with the movement and the applied neurology to focus in on the brain-based healing. Like, how does that circulate together to activate the different pathways?
A lot of the movement that we do is, it's very non-traditional. We move in
Mm,
all different planes and ranges of motion, so that we're stimulating the mechanoreceptors inside of the
mm-hmm,
joints that tell your brain where your body is in space. And so we're moving with this idea of creating a really clear map of where your
mm,
body is in space. And we are making different patterns with our body, responding to things differently. So, trying to undo some of the tension and the trauma patterns in the body by doing novel movements. And we're also discharging the energy that comes when we
mm-hmm,
process some of those emotions through movement. So, we have different types of movement on the site. I have a somatic mat flow where we're really working on undoing the trauma patterns in the body, bringing rotation back to the spine,
mm,
moving the eyes in certain ways as we're moving the body. And then we have the applied neurology, which is just really specifically training like your eyes, your balance system in your inner ear, your body
mm-hmm.
mapping system. And then we just have movement, right? That is my area of expertise. That's my 10,000 hours of practice, teaching people movement. And so we do a lot of mat work in various angles, rotations, planes, always changing the movement, because
Mm-hmm.
movement is a huge part of what our brains evolved for.
Right.
And our motor cortex, it lives right next to our frontal lobe. Areas of the
Mm-hmm.
brain that live next together affect each other. So if I can
Yeah.
bring fuel and activation to my motor cortex, I'm also stimulating my frontal lobe, improving my cognition, my ability to override my reactive brain, my ability to be connected and present and focused. And so the health of our brain is also really dependent and reflected in our movement abilities. And so I really
Mm.
believe that part of having a healthy brain is moving regularly.
Yeah, totally. 100% agree with that. And I love what you said about activating different parts of the brain where it's connected to another part, because our frontal lobe is so important. And we've seen, I would say, the past 20 years, I think, and this kind of change in the dementia, early signs of dementia, Alzheimer's, as our body is telling us, okay, hey, there's something not right in the environment and what you're doing. You need to make some changes. And when I was in medical school, we studied the cadavers, and there were actual cadavers where they had Alzheimer's or some of the early signs of dementia. And I was so fascinated with, you actually could see the change in the brain. And I forever left this stamp on my memory of, wow, this is what it's really like when your brain isn't getting what it's needed. It's like totally deteriorating, like shrinking inside the skull. And so if we have the areas of our brain are active, we're activating them with different activities, it's going to be a happy brain, right? Happy brain equals happy body.
That's right. And yeah, and vice versa. And that's so fascinating that you actually got to see that. And I think it's very true, right? If we don't use it, we lose it, because our brains are wired for efficiency. They take a lot of calories. The brain is an energy hog.
That's right.
And so if some parts are not being used, they're going to deteriorate. And there's a neuroscientist, Dan Walpert, that argues that like the human brain really evolved for movement. If you look at things that don't have a nervous system, they don't move.
Right.
And so in order to keep the system functioning really well, you have to use it for what it was intended to be used for, which is in large part.
Yeah, so key. Yeah, most things move, even the slug. Right. The yellow banana slug. I love that slug from the Pacific Northwest. It's like this huge, massive slug, and you can see like slowly moving across the trail, but it still moves. It still has some type of brain that's telling it what to do, for sure. As we're moving into this beautiful year of 2022, I love for us to revisit this part we've been talking about all through our conversation today about eating. And so stress and eating kind of go hand in hand, which you've talked about. So how can listeners like refocus, reset their brain pattern for 2022 in a way that creating like new eating habits, new like that are focusing on getting the most nutrition, getting the most aspects of their food? What are some of those ways to create that?
I think that it's very easy to have an understanding of what you need to do, and it's hard to sometimes execute that.
Yes,
right?
This is true. Yes.
And especially as the month of January continues on, it's like you can go for a little while and then you start to fall back into these old behaviors. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is, like we mentioned, change is really threatening to the brain. It functions on pattern recognition, and it wants to be able to easily see those patterns so that it can make a prediction to keep you alive. And so if you're changing the patterns a lot, your brain is having to use more energy to make predictions, it's having to work harder, and it doesn't like that. And just try to push you back into the old comfortable way of being.
Right.
And then, so one of the best ways to be able to sustain those changes and to not move back into the old patterns is to regulate your nervous system, to have a daily practice of doing stuff, stimulating your vagus nerve, training your respiration, giving your brain and your nervous system some stimulus that it likes so that it feels less stressed out. So then again, you have more room in your bucket to handle the stress of the behavior change and to make those changes stick until those patterns are what your brain is comfortable with. And then there's also the concept of subconscious blockers to food freedom, or there's a lot of things that at the level of our old brain and our subconscious mind don't feel safe. And that can be for a number of reasons. It could be that you feel like you're going to be rejected from the herd. Maybe in a lot of your relationships, the eating patterns are not in alignment with what you really want, but you're afraid you're going to lose those relationships if you change that, or that people are going to be angry. Or if you have sexual trauma, maybe it doesn't feel safe to let your body change, not in your cognitive mind, but in your subconscious mind. It's not safe if my body changes in a way that I suddenly start to get a lot of attention. I don't have this like protective layer, and that will start to drive your behavior back. Or there's other ones, but those are two of the really big ones. And so finding a way to go back and to create a felt sense of safety around the changes that are happening for you.
Mm-hmm.
And or when you are triggered by, maybe you feel a change, a shift in that relationship with someone, you feel that they're unhappy with you, how can I do something to regulate myself, to calm my nervous system, to make my body feel safe, so that I know that it's okay if this person is upset with me, it's
Mm-hmm.
okay if this shifts and changes a little bit, if somebody makes a comment about my body, how can I
Mm-hmm.
regulate myself so that I don't have to move into a behavior that I don't want, just to feel safe in a world where sometimes people do violate our body boundaries. And
Right.
so just having some tools and understanding that some of this is an old survival response trying to keep you
Mm-hmm.
safe, and from the subconscious mind, and recognizing that, and then how can I create safety when I feel triggered, rather than just going back into the old behavior.
So if you're wanting to, or you started making a new food pattern or food change, and then you're starting to get triggered, so do you recommend addressing the trigger and then going back to what feels safe in that food change? Does that make sense? So say
I would
Mhm.
I I would say, like, having the tools in your back pocket of
Mm,
knowing what your nervous system likes so that you
yeah.
can address it. For example, one of my clients was, she was working at a volunteer event and serving some food, and some police officers there came up, and one of them started sexually harassing her, saying some really inappropriate things about her
Mm,
body. And because they're police officers, she felt like she couldn't respond in a really
mm,
forceful way to protect herself, so she felt
right.
very powerless. And it was a body boundary violation. Even though it was just a comment, it was a violation of her body.
Right.
And so she left there and went to the grocery store and was just
Mm,
like automatically in that state of, I'm going to binge now
right.
because it feels safe. I'm going to
Yeah.
protect myself. I'm going to re-regulate my body through this eating behavior. And then she was also torn because she had all this information and she knew what she was doing. She could see what was
Right.
happening. And she's like,
Yeah.
I
It's like
don't want to
watching a bad
punish
movie
myself.
almost, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to punish myself because of what this man did.
Mhm.
And so she stopped in the grocery store. She let herself,
Mm,
which was to just discharge that emotional energy. She did a
yeah.
couple vagus nerve drills to calm herself back down. And then she did some EFT tapping and just saying, I'm safe now. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be sad. This is my body, like saying what she would have wanted to say to the police
Mm.
officer and tapping through while she said it. And then she got into her car and she screamed and she hit the steering wheel and she discharged that energy
Nice.
and didn't end up binging. So I know that's a lot of work,
Right.
but that's also like a severe example. But if
Right.
you have the new tools to
Yeah.
handle the situations that trigger you, as it could be a much less severe situation, that maybe someone just makes a little comment about your body, or even saying something like, you look like you've lost weight, can sometimes be triggering for
Right.
people when we have that subconscious block. And so you have these new tools to allow you to regulate yourself, to process the emotion through, to discharge it, and you have the awareness of what's really happening. And
Hmm.
then you can start to change the behavior.
I love that. And like you said, it can be a lot of work, but it sounds like once you have those tools in your toolbox, it becomes easier because you're more used to using them. You mentioned EFT, the tapping. Can you talk a little bit, explain what that is for our listeners who might not know, or they're not watching, they're just listening?
Totally.
Yeah.
So EFT stands for Emotional Freedom Technique, and it's also called tapping. And basically, what it does is stimulate different acupressure points
Hmm.
to speak directly with the nervous system to allow you to discharge some of the emotion. It
Hmm.
seems very, very simple, and it is. But it's also really effective. I
Hmm.
really have experienced in my own life that it gives me the capacity to cry, to yawn, to sigh as I'm going through something about stimulating those meridians and calming myself as I
Mm.
talk through the new beliefs, the old situation, or process the stress of something maybe that just happened. And my body suddenly feels safe to, I have all of those somatic releases as I do it. So it's essentially just helping your nervous system to stay calm as you experience a trigger, a stress, an emotion,
Mm-hmm.
and then your body knows intuitively how to release that when it feels safe enough to do that. And so
Right.
it just kind of creates the ability for our body to do what it naturally needs to do to discharge that stress
Mm-hmm. In a safe way.
in
And
a
like you
safe
said,
way.
it's easy. Yeah, tapping is great. And it's so easy, like you said, a great technique you can do anywhere. And you don't in any moment. It's so fast and easy. I love it. Listeners, if you're tuning in and you want more information about tapping, can they find out things about tapping on your website, Elisabeth?
Yeah, I have a free video series that if people go to my website, which is brainbased-wellness.com, you can sign up for the free video series there. It'll teach you a couple really easy neurodrills to help your
Mm.
vagus nerve, your respiration, your vision, and your balance, so that people can experience that in their own bodies. It'll teach you more how to assess and reassess what works for your own nervous system, how to start becoming the expert of your own nervous system. And then it has all of the tapping points and a tapping script so you can start to learn to practice that technique as well.
Oh, super. That's great. And that's at brainbased-wellness.com. And we'll put all that in the show notes so
That's right.
everybody can find it super easy. And as we're wrapping up things today, Elizabeth, it's been such a great conversation. I'd love for you to answer one more question. If you had an unlimited budget right now, what would you do to make the biggest impact on the planet?
I think I would love to do something with the education system where we
Mm,
bring into the system information and knowledge about the nervous system, about somatics, about how to move stress through your body, and how to help kids just stay connected to their
mm,
body and to learn really practical tools, because kids are under a lot of stress right now too.
mhm.
And normally, and in the season of life
Right.
that we're all
Yeah.
in right now, it's even
Right.
more. And so I would love to have big programs that help children somatically process this stress and start
Mm.
to train their nervous system, start to understand how their operating system works.
Yeah, so important, so needed, and so easy. It's so easy for us to do that in all the school systems, to have something where they're taught at an early age how to handle stress, how to deal with it, how to regulate it, right, more easily in their system. Especially like you said, during the pandemic now, I'm just thinking, wow, how what it would be like to be a child right now and be in school and have to be wearing a mask and being afraid of those other students and in your environment. Kids are resilient, they can bounce back, but not all kids are like that. And
Yeah,
the
it's a lot.
so yeah, a lot. And we need to have these tools for them now, not in 10 years when they're looking back and then they're messed
Yeah,
up. They need to have
right.
the tools
Totally.
now. So yeah, that's great. And for the children can use tapping as well, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would be great for parents. If you're tuning in and listening, you can go to Elisabeth's website at brainbased-wellness.com and start learning some of those techniques and teach them to your kids to manage stress.
Yeah, I have a lot of clients that teach the simple techniques to their kids, the
Right.
breathing techniques, the tapping, tongue circles, bouncing and shaking to move stress through. These are things that are super simple.
Yeah.
Kids pick up on really quick because, again, intuitively, they probably know already how to do that. And they just need a little bit of guidance, and it can really help make a big difference.
And children are such great teachers. They'll teach their friends. So
That's
then it
right.
just spreads
That's
like
right.
wildfire. Thanks again, Elisabeth, for joining us today. I loved our conversation. And can you say one more time how people can find you and follow you on Instagram?
Yeah. So thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it as well. And you can find me at brainbased-wellness.com for the website. And then I'm on Instagram at Kristof, Kristof.
Super great. Thanks so much for joining us. And I can't wait to share it with the world.
Thank you.